everybody. So you got a chance to download the raw files from the assignment, and today we are going to start playing with those raw files and looking at some better ways to adjust an exposure beyond just the global controls that we worked at with those simple JPEGs in the last assignment. So what I want to do today is we're going to take a look at some of the pictures that I shot when I was in Maine 2 weekends ago. If you haven't seen the video, you can check it out. I'll probably put a link in the description below. And we're just gonna look at some basic ways to do some local edits. Because when you globally edit, you might be trying to brighten up a certain part of the picture, but you're changing everything and it makes the picture look kind of weird. Whereas local edits are a little bit more like what you would do in a dark room with black and white. All right, so you wanna first import your pictures into Lightroom, and then you should have these 4 raw pictures here. And I'm not going to do them all with you right now because that would be boring, but we'll do maybe one, maybe 2 of them. So let's start with something that's real obvious, needs some help. This one's a pretty easy one, right? So here, what you can see I've done is I've exposed for the sky so that I didn't lose any detail in the sky. And something that Nigel Danson pointed out in one of his recent videos was that a real good way to start when you're editing is to grab the exposure slider and just drag it around to see what you've got. So like I could go this far and still be pulling out kind of interesting detail in the sunset over here. And I can drag it up and look at all that extra stuff that's going on in the landscape. But of course, if we just globally do that, it's like, oh, I got the land, but I lose the sunrise. I got the sunrise really cool, but I lose the land. We're trying to balance that. Now, if we were doing it with global edits, we'd probably say, okay, I'm gonna take these shadows and pump that up. Maybe take my blacks and pump them up a little bit. And I'm going to bring my highlights down to try and bring the sky back in. And maybe my whites, I'm going to adjust those a little bit. Or maybe I'm going to hold down Option and I'll brighten the whites just to the point where it's just clipping the white to bring the contrast back in and stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, well, yeah. And then maybe some extra vibrance. And it looks okay, but it looks very computery, especially if you look over here. There's some weird like lines around where the things line up. So I'm going to undo that stuff. You can just click on a setting to reset it. All right. So now your 2, well, there's 3. There's the brush. I don't use the brush very much because I feel like it leads to weird, awkward selections. I prefer the linear gradient and the radial. We'll start with a linear gradient. I like the way the sky looks, so I'm going to leave it alone. But what I'm going to do is take the gradient and slide it up from here, and it will apply 100% of the edit I'm going to do below the gradient, and then it will fade it out along here. If I wanted to just attach my effects to the sky, I would drag the other way. I'd go down and it'll say, okay, I'm dragging my gradient along here. If you mouse over it, you can see in red where your gradient is going to affect. If you hold down Shift while you're dragging your gradient, I'm just going to delete that. If you hold down Shift, it'll go in a straight line, which can make it an easier thing when you've got a nice straight horizon. If you don't hold down Shift when you drag, you can kind of drag it in any direction you want. So I'm going to hold down Shift, and that seems like an easy fade there. So it's going to start to fade out around the land and really completely fade out in the sky. And then I can drag my exposure up, and you can see it starts to bring the land up without messing with the sky. So somewhere around there. What I'll do is probably just a general kind of brightening, and then I'm going to start to brighten specific areas. So I brought that up a whole stop just on the land, just with that gradient there. Now I'm going to use the radial to sort of bring the same edits in circles. So where do I want to call attention to? It looks like light is kind of hitting there. I look at the light that's already in the picture, and then I kind of accentuate it a little bit. So I've got that circle there. I'm going to bring up the exposure there, bring up some more color. And I'm just dodging and burning this way, just bringing in more light. Dodging and burning are terms from the Lightroom. Sorry, I'm using Lightroom. From the darkroom. You would expose your negative, right? And then you would expose the print when you were developing in the darkroom. And the longer you would expose the paper, the darker it would get that's burning it in. But if you didn't expose parts of the paper for a while, for as long, they wouldn't get as dark, and those would be dodged. You're dodging the light, and it would still be closer to white. So by blocking the light as it's hitting your exposing elements, you could adjust that in various ways. I never really worked in a darkroom. Lies. Never worked in a darkroom. I've been in a darkroom maybe twice in my life, and it was in the early 90s. And I certainly didn't do anything. But I read about it, so that's kind of the process that you would go through. So I'm like, okay, that light is hitting the trees there. I kind of like that. This part is kind of a cool element. I'm going to make a circle here, twist it to sort of fit in there. Your circle, you can also, right here, I've got it set to feathering 100%. You can adjust that so to make, see, real hard edges, real soft edges. I like my edges pretty soft. You could also invert it, click on that, and then it does everything but what's in the circle. So that's pretty nice, kind of boosting that up. I might add a little bit of clarity to add more contrast in there, maybe a little extra texture, something like that. Then I'm going to make another circle right in here, because I didn't like, when I was boosting the land, it started to take away from the water. The water started to get too bright. So I'm going to bring that down just a touch and maybe add a little bit more saturation there. And I'm going to take the clarity out a little bit, smooth that out just a touch. So that's looking pretty cool now. I'm going to go back to my gradient now. I found my little control point. I click on it to select it. I'm going to maybe boost just a little bit more exposure. Now that I've done that control to the water, part of the reason why I wasn't originally boosting the main exposure a lot was because the water was starting to blow out in ways that I didn't like. Now I got to go and take these down a little bit, because now that I've boosted everything else, that's just a little bit too harsh. That's starting to look pretty good. I'm going to make another gradient. I'm going to hold down Shift, and this one I'm going to drag down so it applies to the sky. I'm just going to bring that down a little bit. Maybe add a little bit more contrast. You shouldn't go nuts. Like, that's going nuts. And like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Like, it looks kind of cool, but it looks fake, right? So we want to make it pop, but we don't want to make it look so obnoxiously over processed that people are like, that's not real. So something like that, I think, is kind of a nice touch. And you can clear that out and kind of look through, zoom in, check your elements here. Anything that you really want to call attention to. This little pink area right here, let's bring that in a little bit more. We'll make another circle right just in there. And that, I'm going to go into the colors. I usually use Lightroom Classic, so it takes me a little while to remember where things are in this version of Lightroom. Something like that is pretty good. And then I would go in back to 100%. And we're just going to do a quick global edit for sharpness. Detail. I like to mask a little bit. I hold down Option while I'm doing it to see where all the white is where the sharpening is going to be applied. That helps me get rid of any kind of noise. And then I drag the sharpening up. Don't over sharpen, because then you lose. I think most raw files need a little bit of sharpening. My Z6 and Z7 pictures really don't need very much. Then I would say that one's pretty much done. Like, I would probably take more time with it if I were really working on this picture. I might maybe bring in some more detail there and stuff like that. But let's take a look at another one. So here's another one where I've exposed for the sky pretty well, but the land, it's just a little bit dark. So we'll do the same thing. We're going to bring that's the brush, bring a gradient up. Where do we need that brightness to come in? Right around here somewhere. And this is fun. We're going to use it to also kind of mess with the water. Often the shadows are a little bit cool, so I'm going to bring a little bit of color back into the shadow, a little bit of warmth back into this area here. Then I want the water to pop more. So I'm going to put some circles around the water, and I'm just going to drag the whites up to make the whites a little bit more, and I'm going to increase the clarity on them. See what that does? That's too much maybe. But somewhere around there makes the water effects really kind of. And the nice thing is when you do one circle, then you drag another one, it automatically does whatever you did on the last circle. So I'm just going in there to make the water even more pronounced in its effects. If I were to just do the whole thing whites up, it would kind of do this, but it would also mess up other parts of the picture. if you see, now that I'm looking at it, I needed to clean my sensor. See that dirt spot there? Get those, click on the little Band-Aid. You can just by swiping your mouse, see the size is going up and down. Something like that. And then it automatically picks something that it thinks is going to copy over it and make it pretty good. I don't like where it grabbed it from. I'm going to bring the source around this way a little bit, see if I can make a cleaner line. That looks a little bit better. Maybe over here. What you're basically doing, you're saying from this circle, I'm going to copy from this circle on top of that circle and use that to blot out whatever's in the way. So I'm going to bring out a little bit in the rocks here, maybe warm those up a little bit, bring in some of that kind of orange tones, because the rocks really are pretty orange there. So if I'm losing that, I want to bring that in. Maybe a little clarity. We can go in here, do the same thing. Oh, I already like that. That's bringing out more detail there. And basically what I'm doing is I'm just breaking it down into zones and adjusting each zone. I really don't do, the global edits are good for the overall style of the picture, you know, the basic contrast and stuff like that. But you don't want to mess with it too much for anything else. Do we want to do anything? With the sky here, there's various ways you can do it. I'm going to use a radial for the sky. And that brings, you can see all these different control points. And it's not overly bright because like sunrise, it's not all gonna be bright. So just selectively kind of doing some stuff. Maybe this part is a particularly cool thing, but now I've got those old adjustments that I did in the sky. If I wanna quickly, without having to redo it, just select this, right click on it, duplicate. And now I got the same adjustment thing. I can just resize it. And I'm gonna make that pop even a little bit more. I'm just gonna bring up the exposure there, just a touch. Maybe a little bit of extra texture there. Maybe in the sky, let's take the texture down a little bit. That just sort of softens that out and gives me some of those rays. So that's another way. That's what you can do with local edits. You get a lot more control over the picture and you get the overall style of the camera better and without sacrificing the detail where you want it. So the more you play with that, the better off you'll be. Your assignment is to take these 4 pictures and make them look good. They were all shot with the understanding that I would be post-processing them. So that I shot exposing to the right to keep the sky in the exposure, and then knowing that I could boost the shadows enough to bring that detail right back. All right, play with those and turn them in. Good luck.